Back in 2009, Shigeru Miyamoto had said, quote, "If I was applying for a job here today, I, with my actual college degree, would probably not have been employed by Nintendo." You would think that game companies, Nintendo especially, would want to hire more people like Miyamoto, right? But did you know that Miyamoto had studied industrial design? He went to a small school and his family was pretty modest. He was a regular guy with his own traits and common experiences. He actually didn't even have much connection to the creative arts, or games for that matter. Nevertheless, the point is that Miyamoto is nowhere near the standards of modern game industry hires, and this is something that he himself has acknowledged. In recent years, I've heard plenty of sentiments from people I've talked to or read blog articles highlighting a similar conundrum. I've heard people mention in many different ways how games these days just aren't as impactful. They don't resonate as much anymore. How, after all, games are a whole big industry of its own now, with a lot of incentive to get profits. From the perspective of the people making games, there are a ton of aspiring game developers who only ever want to learn and study game development, and as a result, they only really gain experience in the field of developing a game, and more often than not really having any other life experiences. While, of course, game design knowledge is its own niche and has a lot of aspects to learn, it doesn't exactly provide any common experiences to draw inspiration from. On the other hand, games are for the common people, regular people, the working class. This has been the case before and now. The thing is, for a game to really connect with people, it needs to be relatable to these common experiences. So what's the best way to achieve this? Having people in the game industry with real-life experience. Something that nowadays the industry is beginning to lack. To quote an article about modern game developers that really drives this point home.
The game developers being hired today are all uncommon people. As such, they also lack the life experience that the common people have. They've never had a job where they were digging a ditch or wiring an electrical panel. Why? That is for the plebs. They have rarely left their keyboard outside of appropriate outdoor adventures from Boy Scouts, world travel trips, etc. If they were to make a game about a truck driver, they would have to do research on it because they've never driven a truck.
And to put the final nail in the coffin, modern games feel like they have no heart. They are made by soulless technicians. Give me an indie game any day over these brilliant and studied developers. Over the past 3 years, there have been a lot of successful Nintendo first-party titles, but how have they been perceived by people, really? While on the surface these games are successful, for example, see Animal Crossing New Horizons blowing through the roof because of the pandemic, some fans have felt underwhelmed and dissatisfied by the end product. Even this video was born to these feelings. My friends and I had noticed that we spent a lot of time talking about the subject and our dissatisfaction. The 3 games that were our primary inspiration are Animal Crossing New Horizons, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and Splatoon 3, all for similar but different reasons. So in this video, we'd like to talk about what exactly has made us and communities a little bit, or maybe more than a little bit, disappointed. Of course, we have no idea what decisions are being made at Nintendo. Your guess is as good as ours. This video is mostly our and other people's personal opinions, and we can only theorize as to why these games have been disappointing. Basically, this is a vent video. Let's start off with everyone's favorite game during the pandemic, Animal Crossing New Horizons. It's no secret to any Animal Crossing fan that New Horizons' formula and approach to the series has been discussed at length by many people on the internet, from Reddit posts to YouTube essays.
Personally speaking, I had a lot of hopes going into New Horizons.
Yeah, who didn't?
Pre-release, I thought to myself, wow, I can't wait to play another Animal Crossing game for hours on end. A lot of my expectations were shaped by New Leaf, an entry I love so much and could play for several days. The terraforming feature was something that I highly anticipated as well. I fully believed it'd be a fun way to shape my island the way I wanted to. When I finally got New Horizons on release in 2020, I really enjoyed it at first. I was constantly stockpiling on wood, rocks, and all the other materials as I would try to farm Nook Miles to find my favorite villagers on the island tours. Eventually, I got to KK Slider's concert, which unlocked terraforming, but my excitement quickly transformed into feelings of confusion. Where do I go from here? I wondered. So when I got to terraforming, I was like, okay! I'm going to make this island so cool and dedicate it to my favorite characters. And then it turns out terraforming was like playing Minecraft at half speed. It was so sluggish that my motivation to customize my island completely disappeared. Given that I didn't always want to terraform, I sought out other mechanics from New Horizons. The fishing, bug catching, talking to villagers, but there wasn't much to do in that respect. Villager conversations felt dull and repetitive. And even visiting my friends felt very hollow, especially as someone who would always play the island tours from New Leaf. All you could really do when you visited was walk around. So I stopped playing the game shortly afterwards because it was no longer fulfilling to me.
Whatever.
I can't believe you have to wait for 45 minutes for this thing to...
I know. Hello? Why is this so funny?
Okay, I'm gonna put on the fisheye lens to makes this entertaining because the fisheye lens is the best part of this game. Sorry, this game is so boring that I have to do this.
Oh, I'm finally back. And I got abused! I saw everything.
I didn't realize it then, but New Horizons' progression was very different from previous entries. As you progressed, you were given many goals to work toward. However, after the credits, there was no real concrete goal in the same way there was before. It just left you to your own devices to build your island, which some people loved, but others, not so much.
I think my personal biggest disappointment was getting my favorite villager in my town. Or my island, I guess. I even asked a friend to use an amiibo card for me. But even after she did come to my town, the lack of dialogue felt really apparent. While I can't find concrete information on the amount of text in New Horizons, New Leaf, for example, was estimated to have a little over 1 million words in its script. And I think it's a bit obvious that the dialogue isn't as wealthy in New Horizons, possibly due to the fact that a lot of the dialogue is locked behind certain conditions that aren't common. Or, according to some players' experience, you need to talk to them repeatedly to get some of these new lines. It's a common sentiment that while New Horizons is a good game, it is not a good Animal Crossing game. And I definitely have to agree with that. I'm not sure I'm alone in the experience that I played the game a ton for a month or two after it came out, and I racked up a couple hundred hours of playtime, and then I abandoned my town. I mean, why should I care? They'll all be there anyway, right where I left them, like a dollhouse.
God, if that isn't a mood, I don't know what is.
Common complaints from the community include
Lack of quality life.
such as too many menus.
Splitting items into stacks is tedious.
You can't craft multiple items at once.
You can't buy multiple Nook tickets at once.
There's too much A button spam.
Villagers are lifeless.
Difficulty in obtaining specific recipes.
Disappointing update cycle and lack of support.
Less things to do compared to New Leaf.
One island per switch and no cloud saves.
Transferring islands between consoles is pretty annoying.
Tool durability.
With these complaints in mind, I thought it would be fun to commentate some of the dev statements we have heard about. For example, how director Aya Kyogoku states that
We wanted to create an experience that both old fans and new fans could enjoy.
Stop it! Don't do this. I mean, don't get me wrong, it is good to be inclusive for all sorts of potential players, but at the same time, when you try to please everyone, you end up not delivering on your promises. There is also a bigger possibility of alienating older fans. They even delayed the game plenty of times, so you'd think they'd have spent that time making sure all fans get included, but whether they have done that successfully is a whole debate to be had. Of course, we can only speculate the motivations of this diluted focus, and in the end, I suppose the game did end up catering to a new audience as well. But I don't know if that's entirely the game concept's earning. You know what I mean.
Well, look what the flimsy rod dragged in. And this is funny, remember when you said it was the only thing keeping you going during quarantine? Me too. Yeah, now there's weeds everywhere and I'm getting asked to donate for a bridge that we don't need to an empty spot of land you swore would have a really cute cafe. 4 months and no call. No need for fish or fossils when you have Pfizer, huh?
Now, let's look at what producer Hisashi Nogami had said.
We think that in order for the players to play for a very long time, and also for players to share the experience with their friends or family, we do think that playing without traveling would probably be the ideal way.
How about you actually add a line progression? Like, maybe a street, perhaps, that takes months of playtime to unlock entirely, upgrading and becoming more lively as you play more and more. I wonder if that would be a good approach, not a handful of buildings on your island at best and a single shop upgrade. It already was quite strange, in my opinion, for an Animal Crossing game to have an ending with credits rolling. Sure, technically, it does bring a beginning as well, in terms of the terraforming feature, but that's only a true long progression if you're the kind of person who has a ton of inspiration for your island. Otherwise, I don't know, it's kind of it. Though, to comment on what the quote is originally talking about, time traveling, I feel a bit conflicted on it. Mostly because of the decision to add seasonal events and other season-appropriate features via updates. Despite it, Kyogoku saying, quote,
wasn't our way to shun away time travel by any means.
On one hand, I get it. The digital and social landscape is so impacted by the internet that discussing any kind of media can be quite frustrating because you'll know that people will spoil things for you. So, in a sense, I do respect this decision. However, I think the game wasn't particularly helped by it. People who time travel obviously still did. I suppose it's a good thing they couldn't talk about the seasonal events ahead of time, but it's not like the events made it any more exciting in the end. The events themselves ranged from annoying the entire community to being alright. I mean, you take your pick on what your opinions are on the matter. But it is interesting to note that despite the Southern Hemisphere being finally acknowledged, the updates made for a bit of an awkward flow in terms of the thematics. For example, diving being added into the game in winter for the Southern Hemisphere people out there. All of this just ended up feeling a bit awkward, both in terms of the timing as well as just in terms of us, the players, being promised so many updates, but at the end of it all, it still didn't feel nearly as complete as New Leaf did. And New Leaf had a many years later free update, which was basically like a cherry on top of a massive sundae. And a part of New Horizons' updates were DLC, too, which not everyone would want to pay money for. I personally didn't. I just think it's a shame. I wonder where the series will go from here, if anywhere. There was a long wait between New Horizons and New Leaf, and even if it will be shorter for the next entry, I don't think I will be immediately excited for it. For me, the feeling of I'm not mad, just disappointed, is quite strong here.
Fast forward 3 years later, and Xenoblade 3 releases for the Nintendo Switch. And oh boy, have we seen some mixed opinions. I've seen people praise this game and call it their favorite entry in the series, and others who felt that it didn't quite capture the essence of what Xenoblade means to them. Both viewpoints are perfectly valid, but it's very interesting to us to see how divisive people's opinions on this game are. Spoiler warning for Xenoblade 3 and Xenoblade in general. If you don't want to hear it, go to the timestamp on screen. It will take you to the Splatoon section. Splatoon.
This case might be the most complicated for me. Generally, I realize that most people don't have many issues with the game, if any at all. But for the likely minority of us that did, it's a pretty complex topic.
I've been a fan of the series for nearly a decade, but I do gotta admit that the first game has still remained my favorite after all these years.
Nevertheless, I enjoyed what Xenoblade X and Xenoblade 2 had to offer. But with 3...
Why didn't the main game have any fog
I
beasts?
suppose so. How are we for ether?
At least not that I remember.
Because the main game sucks. What?
So true, that was so
I'm
true.
kidding. I'm kidding. It's just a bit. I don't know.
No, you're right. You're right, and you should say it.
The most devastating part of it was that I simply did not care for it once I finished playing. Not for the world, not for the characters, or the themes that it was trying to tell. When I eventually did finish the game, I felt like I could move on extremely easily, which had never been the case with the previous games in the series. While the reveal at the end of Xenoblade 2 was powerful and infinitely awesome to experience, the multiverse approach that was taken from that revelation in the form of Xenoblade 3 did not feel very satisfying. It felt like the game was way too self-absorbed in trying to tell this new angle of the multiverse. There were many cases where I thought it felt really apparent, but especially after reading through a great analysis of the themes done by my good friend Rudra, it felt even more frustrating. Nevertheless, my personal conclusions and feelings reading it aside, it is a really good essay exploring the story that the game was trying to tell, so I recommend it, whether you enjoy the story or not. By now, the Xenoblade series has nailed its formula and what it has to offer. But in the case of Xenoblade 3, the story felt limited by its gameplay and formula. We have our main party, who, due to Ouroboros mechanics, are basically forced to be in your party at all times, no matter what, and they stick together for the JRPG powers of friendship and determination to carry them to their conclusion. Now, of course, this isn't a bad thing per se. However, for the scope of the themes that 3 was trying to show off, it simply didn't feel like it landed as well as it could have. It also feels like the game is not committing to the whole multiverse thing either. You could say it was done to make the game accessible to newcomers, and maybe some Nintendo business higher-ups making demands that had to be met. Though, of course, this is just a theory, but it becomes almost comical how, for example, the only 2 characters from previous games mentioned by characters in Future Redeemed were Giorgio and the Gem Man. Other than that, the choice to have Melia and Nia be the respective queens of each faction just felt like they had to bring back the fan favorites of the previous games. Sure, Melia fits her role perfectly fine given her background, so that's fine. However, Nia is a bit of a strange choice in my opinion. So, here's my hot take on how they could have done this more tastefully. If the game had taken a less linear approach and was able to give more perspectives other than just the main parties, it could have been so much more fascinating to have the POVs of the old beloved characters mixed in with the circumstance of the new. It could potentially show off the contrast between what the established characters from previous entries are trying to do via the construction of origin, as well as their intention with it, while also highlighting the consequences from within from the newer perspective of the fresh main party. Or, if we want to take the more simple fix, just explore the past lives of Noah and Mio, because that would have been interesting too, versus the 2-hour movie in Chapter 5 you must sit through with a highlight reel of those times. The way the game actually tells you its world building and establishes the plot, the bits we do get of the old characters feel like fan service at best. If Xenoblade 3 is truly supposed to be a sequel to the previous entries, then make it feel like one. The approach they went for felt too subtle and too scared of commitment for a supposed sequel. I do want to note though that I don't mean to say that the subtle themes and stories in a game are a bad approach to telling a story in general. But at least in the case of Xenoblade 3, for me and many others, it just felt too subtle to make a meaningful impact and investment in the world as well as its people. Plus, looking beyond the ties to the series, at times it did feel a bit washed out by choices made in the storytelling to really feel like it's good in its own right. Some people may argue that a lot of its depth is achieved by completing all the side quests, or at least unlocking all the heroes and completing their quests. However, personally having done the latter, it didn't change my mind on it, so clearly it still wasn't in my face enough. So what I just talked through was the observations and conclusions after more than a year of digesting this and having time to discuss the game with others and reading material and opinions. I do also want to share my general experience at the time when I was playing the game. To begin with, I was actually enjoying the game a fair amount until the end of Chapter 6. While I do concede that I generally did find the main cast good, and I also agree that objectively they are the strongest of all the casts in the series, I didn't think that I was really falling in love with them. Perhaps it's just the inherent lack of empathy to their situation that I had, as well as the fact that they all had practically the same past traumas, just in slightly different flavors. Once again, due to the circumstance.
So in the end, no matter how well their dynamics were written, I didn't find them compelling enough to feel like I really, truly care for them, and I didn't have the hunger to immerse myself further into the characters and their world. Arriving at the city for the first time and actually having real people in the game and the way their life was so foreign to the main party, that was the one point I actually did feel a bit invested in. However, at the end of the day, even this is something that I don't really have a lot of positive feelings left about. Especially after the ending and being told that the people of the city just cease to exist forever. At the end of the day, it just doesn't particularly feel like it has the longevity that other media I enjoy gives me in terms of my favorite characters, places, and so on. For me to speculate on their lives afterwards, to wonder about them, and to be invested.
Forgotten what it feels like to be this.
I love this game so much!
I wonder what the future has in store for us.
Very good
Who
game.
knows?
Best game.
I'm sure it will be full of
game of all
ups
time.
and downs.
As I previously mentioned, the end of Chapter 6 really was the last straw for me. I think the introduction of Nia and the way she was framed as stabbed, but being fine moments later was something that made my eyes roll the first time. But the inter-universe video call really was the cherry on top that made me feel like I was reading a bad fanfic in the form of a video game. It does sound really harsh, but I'm just being honest, because that was the moment where the magic just got completely cut off for me. Besides, after all these years of the fandom's theories on the world merging, hearing what actually happened in canon was just a bit like, sure? And from there on out, it just felt worse and worse. The plot points were kind of rash, and having a chunk of the main story be the hero quest for Noah and Mio, I found myself playing the game with less and less care. Which also brings me to a more specific complaint I had about the plot that very easily added to my final indifference about the world: the treatment of character deaths. So, not only did the deaths of the characters we met along the way not matter, even the characters that were fundamental to the main cast in terms of their past and development just return. Death is such a powerful tool for characters and their motivations. If you don't take it seriously, then there's no reason to care. So, I didn't. The ending didn't help either. Being told that the entire game basically happened across a few seconds at best and wasn't really real, I already found myself indifferent about it, so why should I care? Now, you may have noticed by now, I am mostly talking about the game's story. This is because I'm someone who doesn't particularly play RPGs for gameplay, and I thought the gameplay was fine, so I'm afraid I don't have much to comment on there. And as far as I can tell, the general consensus is that the gameplay seems quite good. Aside from some tutorial and menu complaints, but even that mostly only surfaced in the community discussions later on. There's also some note in terms of how the world doesn't feel very memorable, but this is something that does go hand in hand with my complaints about the story, even if for this video I will not be elaborating on it. That was my experience. A lot of indifference and anger at what could have been. Thankfully, I do have like-minded friends to share my woes with, but in terms of the fandom, it can feel more alienating than ever before. The Xenoblade fandom isn't exactly known for its civil discussions, but I often wonder how many people out there have felt similar to me, but just haven't shared their opinion because people tell them that they're wrong to compare the games or something of the sort. I mean, in the Xenoblade fandom, people could barely stop arguing whether 1 or 2 is better for years before. So, obviously saying that 3, which some regard as the best entry in the series, could be even a little bit flawed, would set the entire house on fire in a classic Xenoblade fandom fashion. I have learned my lesson now to no longer go into every Monolith Soft game and be served a mind-blowing experience like the games before had. While I am curious about whatever they will be making next, if the next game happens to be Xenoblade 4, I'm not entirely sure I'd be interested in playing it before it's out for a good while and people's opinions on it have been shared. I also personally just think that Monolith Soft would be better off creating something original again, and have no worries about previous entries to tie to. That would be quite a breath of fresh air. But really, who knows? Maybe the Nintendo business higher-ups will just have Monolith Soft making Xenoblade games over and over for the next decades to come.
You know what other game Monolith Soft worked on? Splatoon 3! Look, there they are!
Oh, look at that! In the Animal Crossing New Horizons credits too. What a fun coincidence.
Splatoon 3 is among one of my most played games, and while I love this game a lot, there's some aspects about it that trouble me. While the game looks mostly put together, especially compared to Scarlet and Violet, there's some hints that Splatoon 3 is a rushed game. Let's begin with the concept art from the Splatoon 3 art book. Inside, you'll find art showcasing the colorful and imaginative setting that the series has been known for. Growing up, I loved the stages on the Wii U. Each stage had their own distinct identity and shape, so even if they weren't fun to play on, it was at least memorable. Playing Splatoon 3 for the first time was a lot of fun, but as the novelty wore off, I noticed that a lot of the stages blended together in my mind. They felt the same. Anyone who's been following the Splatoon community during the first 9 months of 3's release may be familiar with the maps being compared to Tetris blocks, or ProChar's video discussing the issue of 3's map design. Great video, by the way, check it out. When comparing the concept art and trailers to the in-game result, there are some pretty clear differences. The beta versions look vast, filled with flank routes and unique geometry, only for the final versions to be a condensed S-shaped hallway with little to no inkable walls. There's a few ways this can be interpreted. One interpretation is that the maps needed to be downsized because the developers lacked resources. Another theory is that the developers were told to make maps that emphasize fast-paced fighting over exploration. Personally, I think Splatoon 3's maps lack terrain and gimmicks that make them memorable, which is unfortunate given how unique the maps in Splatoon 1 were. Fortunately though, the map design for this game has been improving. The newer stages like Crab Leg Capital and Robo Ramen allow for more movement options compared to starter stages like Mincemeat Metalworks. And of course, it's always possible they may rework stages at a later date. Now, let's take a look at Splatoon 3's main campaign, Return of the Mammalians, which was described to be
the epic finale of this splat-tastic saga.
For something intended to be a finale, it sure didn't feel like one. Like, where's Agent 4? Hello? Initially, I finished Return of the Mammalians feeling that it was an alright story. But upon further examination, I realized there were a lot of unresolved threads and questions to be answered. What if I told you that the main campaign was supposed to be something else? A tweet from Rossica shows a photo from the Splatoon 3 art book containing a rough sketch titled Splatoon 3: The Tribe. They also go on to note that there weren't many concepts related to Return of the Mammalians. Like Rossicas, I also wondered what happened in development to warrant a last-minute change in direction. Over time, I started to wonder, was the storyline changed so that future entries can be promoted by reusing characters from the Squidbeak Splatoon? Like all other parts of this essay, this is just conjecture and cannot be truly answered, but I find it interesting that both Xenoblade 3 and Splatoon 3 feature characters from previous games, yet it's not entirely fulfilling for some parts of the audience. Not only that, but both games end in a way that allows these characters to reappear in a potential sequel. Personally, I tend to be weary whenever popular characters make a reappearance in future games. It's not to say that it can't be done well. There are plenty of sequels that offer a fresh take on the storyline that wouldn't have been possible with only one game. But sometimes, sequels and spin-offs just feel like a cash grab. Characters feel like flanderized, hollow versions of what they were in the original, or stories just feel like a rehash of previous games with different mechanics. So how does this relate to Splatoon? I think Splatoon 2 integrates pre-existing characters into the story meaningfully, while Splatoon 3's integration falls flat. The story of Splatoon 2 would not be what it is without the Squid Sisters. I loved how the final Splatfest of Splatoon 1 influenced Callie and Marie's role in 2. It was a great way of making the player base feel that their contributions mattered. Hypnoshade Callie was very entertaining, like, wow, I love her. And I also found it very interesting to see how Marie coped while Callie was missing. However, the core of Splatoon 2's story being about the Squid Sisters made it so that Off the Hook's story was locked behind DLC. This isn't necessarily a bad thing though, since Octo Canyon and Octo Expansion each had a distinct and focused purpose with what kind of story they wanted to tell. Meanwhile, I left Splatoon 3's campaign feeling that it lacked a clear vision of what kind of story it wanted to tell. To me, the Squid Sisters could be removed from the storyline without much consequence. Like, they cried at Cuttlefish being dried up and I guess that happened! And even though Deep Cut's antagonistic role within the story was rather humorous, I find it a bit sad that if you wanted to learn their backstory, you had to seek out information outside of the game. Mr. Grizz also suffers from this unfocused storytelling. His motives and how he managed to set up Grizzco in a society where mammals are completely extinct were left unclear. By changing story concepts last minute, we got a disjointed story that left characters as hollow shells with no concrete objective to be part of. I think the question of, is deliberately leaving room for sequels a good storytelling practice, is outside of the scope of what this video is trying to accomplish. But if that was what Splatoon 3 was trying to do, I don't think it was a good move. Now, let's talk about the update cycle, which is probably the biggest indicator that the development team is being overworked and rushed. Splatoon 3 operates on a seasonal model, releasing new clothes, weapons, maps, and other major features every 3 months. In previous entries of Splatoon, post-release content and balance patches were not as structured, but were more frequent. For Splatoon 2, one weapon kit was released every week from September 2017 to April 2018. New kits came out every month from June to December 2018, and a final batch of kits released in April 2019. As for stages, they were released once a month or so. For Splatoon 1, new weapons and alternate kits would be released at least once a month in varying amounts from June 2015 to January 2016. 2 batches of kits came out in April and June 2016, and maps would release every 1 to 2 months. It's hard for me to say whether or not we as consumers are expecting too much from 3-month updates, or if the devs are under-delivering and the longer wait between updates makes this more apparent. Something I found disappointing about this game's update cycle is how infrequent alternate kits have been. Splatoon 3 has been out for a year and 6 months at this point, and 12 out of 59 weapons still don't have second kits. That's 20%. I don't really understand why only 8 to 11 weapons are released every season, especially when the Splatoon modding scene shows that making custom kits is just a matter of changing a few lines of code. So it begs the question, what is the holdup for the last batch of second kits? Perhaps the devs want to limit the amount of data they have to work with in order to make meaningful balance changes to the game. Or maybe they're overworked and need to spread out kit distribution to ensure that they have something safe and easy to add to the game over the course of 2 years. I don't know, and theorizing won't get me anywhere. But what I do know is that some people are still waiting for their favorite weapon to release.
Not me though. I got pretty lucky.
6 months! You waited for 6 months! I have been waiting longer than you! Me and my 18-month Squiffer. You may be wondering, why are alternate kits important? Why are you so hung up about this? Weapon kits consist of a main weapon, sub-weapon, and special. Different sub and special combinations allow players to engage with a different playstyle not offered by the original kit, so that they have the option to play their favorite weapon in different scenarios. Or perhaps the current sub and special of their favorite weapon just doesn't feel fun to play. Long story short, alternate kits allow people to play the game how they want to and gives them options to choose from. I myself am a lover of all things Squiffer, and I can't help but feel disappointed that there still hasn't been a second kit for it yet. I like the original kit a lot, but sometimes I'm frustrated that I can't opt for a more aggressive playstyle of some kind of bomb. It's not that big of a deal breaker to me since I do enjoy playing the game otherwise, but I don't know why me and other players have to wait at least 18 months for the remaining weapons. The wait for second kits can be especially agonizing when it turns out to be the least synergistic thing possible. And even if that combination isn't bad, it's not always what people want. I think people's disappointment with kits is understandable given that people have been waiting for at least 3 months to have an opportunity to play the game differently. The Reflex Deco has to be the most egregious example, being a candidate for one of the worst kits in the game due to the lack of synergy and the...
That's it? That's the Reflex it? That was just a Reflex! What a rip! Reflex betrayed us! I'm gonna run away! That's what I'll do! Run away!
At one point, I mained Reflex, and I was interested in trying it again with a new kit, but not like that. I sure hope I don't have to hold a funeral when the second Squiffer kit comes out. While I've chosen to highlight the issue with the kit distribution specifically, there's other parts of the updates that have felt lackluster to people. For example, some catalog items were repeated after the first 4 seasons instead of being put in the shops. Some clothing items from Splatoon 2 have yet to be ported. Gameplay-wise, the balance patches lack creativity in how to rebalance the game, with most changes to specials being some kind of radius increase or decrease. It's hard to say what the philosophy is behind the game's balance changes. Is it to make the game feel good individually like Splatoon 1, or to encourage teamwork and coordination like Splatoon 2? The challenge mode added to the game was only available sporadically in 6-hour increments. Heck, even an update that was made to fix a bug didn't do what it was supposed to do. If I, as an active player, find most updates my salmon run to be disinteresting, what does that imply for people who are casually interested in Splatoon? Regardless of the grievances that I have with Splatoon 3, I still enjoy the game as a whole, and most of the issues stated here can be changed in a later patch. I hope that going forward, the release of Side Order will lighten the load on the devs, and that people can fondly look back on Splatoon 3. And hopefully, other game developers don't have to crunch and compromise on the vision that they have for their games, and by extension, the quality of it.
This concludes our main topics of interest, but there are a few more footnote games, as we like to call them, that we would like to take a bit of a shorter approach analyzing. Nintendo Switch Sports. Ah yes, another weird one that people were excited for, but then flopped somehow. I think a lot of people were excited for this game since, for a lot of us, playing Wii Sports and Wii Sports Resort was a very fun time. So, the game came out, and at first there were a lot of people picking up the game who had a pretty good time playing, but a big complaint that eventually surfaced was the lack of a single-player experience, as it was lacking any kind of meaningful progression, and instead this progression was offered in online modes only, which also required a membership. And then later, of course, was the lack of updates. Strangely, very parallel to the promise and eventual failure to deliver updates in Animal Crossing New Horizons. Oh, I see. As for my personal experience, during the times I did play, it seemed pretty hopeful and exciting, especially with the menu being an overhead view of the new Woohoo Island. Spoko Square. I had to Google this while I was writing the script, so that says something, doesn't it? Anyway, having the overhead view of where all the games take place, it seemed like it'd be a great opportunity to expand on it more eventually. Perhaps fix up the complaints that people had about single player no longer offering a good progression system and all of that good stuff. Unfortunately, as far as I'm aware, after they released the golf update, there has been no sign of life since, which is a huge shame as I think it actually had a good base foundation. It seems that the game still has its niche community who continue to play, as frankly the online setting can be quite addicting and fun. I myself experienced this watching my partner fall into the deep rabbit hole of competitive football. Soccer for you American viewers. Other than that though, you barely see anyone talk about the game anymore. Anyway, I think this one falls into the not angry but disappointed category. I myself did play the game a bit, as at the time I had the incentive of having my long distance partner around to play video games locally with. But once he had gone home, so did my motivation to play the game. I suppose this is one of those cases where all we can do is dream of the things that could have been. Nintendo, why are you missing out on these opportunities with your games?
Speaking of dreams, my dreams were crushed when Fashion Dreamer came out. Wow, that's a lot of dreams. One of my favorite games growing up was Style Savvy Trendsetters. The game's business simulator aspect and variety of clothing styles made so much of an imprint on me that I yearned to have another experience like it. And what do you know? In the February 2023 Direct, the developers of Style Savvy, Sin and Sophia, announced Fashion Dreamer. It was one of the highlights for me and something I wanted to see more of. Then November came along, the game came out, and I don't want to say that I was disappointed, but Fashion Dreamer felt lackluster to me. I knew from the gameplay trailer that the running your own boutique part of the Style Savvy games wouldn't be present, but at the time I thought, okay, that's fine. There seems to be a nice variety of clothes to dress up characters with. While Fashion Dreamer definitely delivers on its premise of being a dress-up game, I didn't realize how important it was for my games to be grounded in real-life experiences. There's certainly no shortage of clothes. If you like someone's outfit, you can basically steal their look at no cost to you. But something about the progression felt off to me. Even though there's objectively nothing wrong with having a simple, easy-to-understand gameplay loop. The objective of Fashion Dreamer is to grow followers by coordinating outfits based on people's wish lists. This sounds fine and good on paper, but when NPCs still enjoy your outfit when you give them something completely different from what they asked for, my sense of immersion just gets broken. I suppose you could say that the players should be rewarded, but the way you'd get followers just by doing anything you want doesn't sit right with me. You don't even have to optimize and follow the trends unless you're really into min-maxing your points. Perhaps I'm a bit too critical because I have experience running social media accounts, and I know that accumulating followers is not a linear process, but Fashion Dreamer just feels like it lacks something to keep it grounded. When Fashion Dreamer released, a lot of people on Reddit discussed their thoughts on the progression and the lack of boutique management. Some people really enjoyed that Fashion Dreamer lets them focus on the dress-up aspect, while others left the game wanting more out of their experience. Personally, I think I'm the latter. I don't think Fashion Dreamer is for me, even if I find the dress-up portion fun. The two games have different things they want to achieve, and I simply find Style Savvy to be more resonant with my own life than Fashion Dreamer ever was.
At the beginning of the video, we highlighted an observation that has been becoming more prevalent over the recent years. So how is it linked to each of the games we discussed? The first Animal Crossing game on the GameCube was originally born out of the game director's experience moving from his hometown to a city to work for Nintendo, realizing how important it is to spend time with family and friends. There were so many thoughtful small details,
such as letters from your parents and just the general atmosphere of having just moved into a new town.
The newest Animal Crossing game, on the other hand, was made to cater to the requests of old fans and new fans alike, ultimately leaving the legacy of the original inspiration in the background, barely present. Sure, we can terraform our islands however we like, and the villagers can never leave without our explicit permission. But, and this might be a controversial thing to say, maybe making do with our towns as they were was the more cozy and, dare I say, the common experience that was the key. Yes, some villagers moved into your beautifully laid out flowers, but that's just how it was sometimes. It was frustrating, but you made do. I personally remember I often found myself making the best of it and having to come up with some new alternative pathing ideas, which was actually quite a lot of fun in the end. Yeah, sometimes planting trees or placing projects was tough, as your perfect idea got ruined because you needed just one extra tile of space. That was freaking frustrating, huh? But maybe that one formation of a cliff made it the perfect little space for a public works project and added a lovely scene to your town. It didn't have to be perfect, you made do with what you had. For New Horizons, developers didn't focus on a common experience. In fact, it was the opposite. The frustrating parts of the common experience had to be removed to improve on the previous entries of the game. And yet they still made abysmal quality of life decisions like too many menus and other things. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Xenoblade 3's characters were designed to not be relatable, hard to empathize with. It was important for the themes that were pretty in-depth, but, in my opinion, not as apparent as they could have been. So, in the end, the main feeling I experienced playing the game was lack of investment, purely because of the lack of experiences to sympathize with. Xenoblade 1 and 2 does a much better job with having a variety of characters with different backgrounds and experiences. Of course, the setting also allows for it. So overall, it makes the story something that is relatable, and to all kinds of people too. It encourages investment. You want to know if these characters get over their traumas, or if they achieve the things they wished for. In a sense, this design lack of relatability in Xenoblade 3 proves the point that games these days aren't made with common people in mind. Granted, this is a very spicy argument that takes a very complex narrative and simplifies it a ton, so take it with a grain of salt. But I just personally can't help but feel like it was a massive reason for my eventual dislike of the narrative, even if deep down it had all these great themes to tell. Overall though, I think that Tetsuya Takahashi, who is the director, scenario, and concept creator of the Xenoblade series, is an excellent story writer with a lot of brilliant ideas that I'm sure are related to his own experiences in some ways. But maybe even he has been stifled by the modern game industry, having to create games that Nintendo would approve of, that would cultivate big audiences, that would sell more copies, potentially requiring compromises on his creative vision. All of this is to say that while stories in RPGs don't have to be confined to the real-world rules, having aspects of some common real-world experiences elevates the fantasy for the common people experiencing it. In Xenoblade 3, I'm not sure that I can confidently say that that was the case, at least not on a surface level, and certainly not enough. It seems like a part of the development process that should have been, how can we create something for the common people, turned into, how can we create something for the gamers so that we can make sure that the game sells? Now, again, disclaimer, this is all just speculation, and I may be absolutely and utterly wrong, but I'll never know for sure, so I'm just telling you what I think.
Despite having over 300 staff members working on the game, Splatoon 3 had a very troubled development. The map design, story campaign changes, and slow kit distribution all hint to some friction and a shift in philosophy. If we compare the staff credits from each Splatoon game, you'll notice that a lot of new blood was hired for Splatoon 3. Interestingly, not many game designers from Splatoon 1 and 2 returned for Splatoon 3. Only 5 staff members did. These days, Splatoon is recognized as one of Nintendo's flagship IPs. It's no longer, "You're a kid now, you're a squid now, you're a kid, you're a squid, you're a kid, you're a squid, you're a kid now," where nobody knew anything about it. Now that Splatoon is an established series, they may feel pressure to keep the momentum going. We think it's possible that so many people were hired for Splatoon 3 so that the game would live up to the hype of being the next entry of this smash hit series. In theory, having a lot of people working on the game sounds like a great idea. From an outside perspective though, we're a bit perplexed at the number of game designers doubling between Splatoon 2 and 3. Granted, we don't know much about the game development process, nor are we experts on it. But it seems like having that many designers has the potential to make communicating more complicated than needed, especially during a time like the pandemic. We don't know much about the new hires and their experiences of game design, but the abundance of concepts shown in the art book that weren't fully realized can give the implication that the team was ambitious and bit off way more than they could chew. Thinking of it this way, it makes sense why not everyone was entirely satisfied with Splatoon 3's maps, story, and update cycle.
Maybe even the staff themselves. It's too bad we don't have a lot of information on their process and thoughts.
New Famitsu interview 1! Either way, Splatoon 3 points to the idea that game designers are so immersed in learning their craft at the cost of gaining real-life experiences that keeps their ideas grounded in what's feasible. Everyone is trying to do their best, but what they put out ultimately falls short.
Having a long-time passion for these game series can be both a blessing and a curse, especially in the modern game industry climate. Your love for these games is basically held hostage against you, whether due to feeling the pressure that you have to like every new game, or because you are the odd one out with a different opinion than the rest of the community. We hope that we've been able to give a new perspective on the flaws of these games and possibilities of why they are that way, even if a lot of it is speculation. Especially since all of these games are objectively successful, although of course we're arguing that it is declining from success. It can be hard to go against the majority opinion that the games are perfect actually, and you're just a hater. For us personally, this video is a closure to a long time discussion we've had amongst ourselves, but a part of why we thought it'd be a good idea to make this video was to also reassure anyone else who might be feeling the same. This is a safe space to share any of your observations. Also feel free to disagree, though please be civil, or mention whatever we may have missed. If you would like to see something similar to this video that actually explores the way that Nintendo has changed over these past few years, I would highly recommend this video, as I think it goes very well hand in hand with the topics that we talked about.
Phew, Lina, that was a lot. God, aren't video games fascinating? I want to put them under a petri dish.
Yeah, they sure are fascinating. Thanks for watching this video, and see you around.